Now it's time to introduce the speakers for our first session, Sustainable Food Systems. During this session, remember to think of questions and enter them into Mentimeter after the last speaker for our Q&A session. First on our panel this morning is Sarah Bostic, who will discuss sustainable agriculture production. Sarah is a Sustainable Agriculture Extension Agent at the University of Florida IFAS Extension, Sarasota County. She works with farmers, ranchers, and nursery operators to share information about best management practices and resource conservation practices and programs while helping producers troubleshoot issues as they arise. Our second speaker, Tiffany Bailey, will tell us about creating a double win by building a sustainable farm and business. Tiffany is a fifth-generation farmer in Sarasota County. She is the president and owner of Bayside Sod Incorporated, Honeyside Farms, and the Florida Beef Alliance. These operations are responsible for more than 700 acres of turf grass, organic fruits and vegetables, and all natural cattle in Sarasota and Manatee counties. Please help welcome Sarah Bostic.
So hello, everyone. Is that very bad sound? Does this sound better? Great, sounds good. So I'm going to start by just asking, what is sustainable agriculture? I think that if you ask 100 people, you'll probably get 100 different definitions of what sustainable agriculture is. And there's many entities that have attempted to define sustainable agriculture. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization is one of them. And they created a 5-part definition. And this is just one of the 5 parts of that definition up here on the screen. And it's a definition that I think most of the folks in this room would probably really resonate with, right? It's about how we manage our land and our water and natural resources. I also imagine that most folks in this room would probably resonate with this picture that's up on the screen. Most people would probably look at this picture and say, yeah, that probably looks something like what sustainable agriculture looks like. So, remember I said that the United Nations had a 5-part definition of sustainable agriculture. And really at the heart was that definition that really addressed the environmental elements of what sustainable agriculture is. But there are 4 other parts of that definition. And these are not the words on the screen from the United Nations. They're my words, but they parallel the words that the United Nations uses for the other categories of definition. And these are 4 parts that really get to a different part of sustainable agriculture, which is literally sustaining agriculture. We're at a really interesting moment in time in the history of agriculture, both in this country and across the world, where agriculture is becoming both more and more viable and more tenuous all at the same time. And there's a few different categories that we need to address in this conversation about what is sustainable agriculture. And to start with, we need to talk about land. We need to make sure that there will actually forever be land to actually practice agriculture on, the literal physical land. So right now there's about 1,000 new people that move into the state of Florida every single day. That's a huge number. Over the next 50 years, it's projected that about 15 million new people will live in the state of Florida. And that will displace about 2 million acres of agricultural land in Florida, which adds up to 4.5 times the size of Sarasota County, where we're sitting right now. That's a lot of land. So what are farmers doing to be part of the solution to this loss of land? Well, one of the things that farmers are doing in larger and larger numbers is that they're putting their land into conservation easements. So just like folks that own wild land, who sell the development rights to a conservation group so that that land is forever and ever wild. Farmers are also starting to sell the development rights of their land to conservation groups so that that land in perpetuity is agricultural land. And that clearly gets gets to some of the issue of making sure that we sustain land. But how does that also wrap into sustainable agriculture, that the practices of agriculture are increasingly sustainable? Well, think about it this way. If a farmer knows that he or she is getting near the time of retirement, and his or her plan is to sell that land to developers, how likely is that farmer to really put time and energy and money into really advancing the sustainability of their farming systems, compared to that farmer who knows that his or her land in perpetuity will be in agriculture, so that their great-great-grandchildren can still be farming that land? There is a very decent chance that those two pieces of land will be managed very differently. So I think it's also really important when we talk about sustainable agriculture to remember that farmers love their land. That's why they farm. They love land, and they love feeding people. And it's a really, really wonderful little known fact that many, many farmers sign up for voluntary conservation programs. I think the general public doesn't know this about farming. There's so many different voluntary conservation programs that I could talk about, but I just want to highlight one program, actually through the Florida Department of Agriculture. They have a program called Best Management Practices Program, and it's a cost share program that helps farmers purchase equipment that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford, that helps them be more sustainable in how they manage their land. So I would guess that probably no one in this room, save maybe Tiffany, would look at this huge hunk of equipment and say, yeah, that looks like something that's improving the sustainability of a farm, right? No, not many people would look at a big piece of equipment and say that that looks like an improvement. But let me tell you why for this particular farm, it is. And this is a story of how sustainable agriculture is really a continuum. It is not that some of us are sustainable and some of us are not. It's really that we as agriculture are on a continuum to constantly be improving how we manage our land. So this is a picture I took recently on a local farm, and they purchased this piece of equipment, which is called a precision fertilizer spreader. And this farmer told me that they weren't able to purchase this without the cost share program, but they ran all the numbers from just the first year of owning this piece of equipment and discovered that by running those numbers, that in 3 years they could have paid for it in savings. And I'm going to tell you what those 3 sets of savings were that this one piece of equipment did for their farm. The number one savings this farm had was in fertilizer. This precision fertilizer spreader spreads fertilizer precisely where it is needed. In traditional fertility systems, fertilizer goes everywhere. It ends up in the ditches, in pathways, on the weeds. This very simple machine puts it only where it's needed. So this farm saved enormous amounts of money and fertilizer that would otherwise be running off into water systems. They also had a tremendous savings in diesel, which is, as we know, not a great thing for our environment. The wings on this piece of equipment stretch out so far that a single pass with a tractor can cover a very wide swath of field that they used to have to drive up and down and up and down and up and down a field with. And the third is in labor. Labor is in very short supply right now, and this farm was able to save a huge amount of labor cost. So this is how a very unsustainable looking machine has actually greatly increased the sustainability of this farm. It's also really important when we talk about sustainable agriculture and talk about sustaining agriculture to talk about the economics of farming. And one of those branches is in production. So there's a technique called grafting. And grafting is a very, very old technique that has traditionally been used for hundreds of years across the world in fruit tree production. If you have ever eaten a fruit that comes from a tree that has a name, like a Macintosh apple, it was created by grafting. And about 10 or so years ago, scientists and farmers discovered that grafting also works really, really well with annual crops like tomatoes. And I don't know if you can see on the screen well enough. I think the picture quality is a bit blurry. But up here, these are 2 different varieties of tomatoes, or excuse me, the same variety of tomato. The one on the left was created by grafting. The one on the right just by regular putting a seed in a pot and waiting for it to grow. And basically the way grafting happens is that you take the root system of a variety that's very, very disease resistant and very climate resilient, and on top of it, just like a skin graft, you graft on a variety that you actually want to eat, that tastes good, and then they grow as one. And so up here on this picture, I don't know if you can actually see it well enough, but the one on the left is very healthy plants that are covered in fruit, and the ones on the right are very unhealthy. So this farmer not only gets far more yield from a crop that was grown using grafting, but they also have no incentive to use significant amounts of fungicide and bactericides and other chemicals that are controlling disease on these plants. So that's a really simple technology that's been around for hundreds of years that we're just starting to use in a different way in agriculture. Oops. It's also really important to talk about our distribution systems. We don't have time to go into that, but Florida agriculture is really predicated on the idea that we grow it here and then we ship it out. We ship it to other countries, we ship it to the rest of the country. We don't have good, strong local distribution systems, and that's a major element that needs to be changed in the state of Florida. We need to keep more of what we grow right here, because when you're shipping it out, that's inherently not sustainable. Not getting the click. So, let's see, is it going to go? Well, it's not moving, so I'm just going to keep talking. I think I remember what's where. So there we go. So in the 1820s, 70% of our population worked in agriculture, and today it's only 1.3%. So another element of sustaining agriculture is actually making sure we have farmers to do the work of it. And it's really important also to think about this new generation of farmers that we have. And they're really different. They're farming in a very different way than the older generation farmed. And we're part of cultivating that new generation of farmers through programs like 4-H and New and Beginning Farmer and Rancher programs. And this new generation of farmers, these young people, they grew up hearing about sustainability and climate change, hearing about environmental destruction and food insecurity, and they also grew up knowing that they could be a part of making the changes to make our systems more sustainable. That's always been part of their reality in a way that it wasn't for older generations. And they're interested in things like agricultural engineering and precision agriculture and understanding our soil in ways that we've never understood our soil before. So this new generation of farmers that's coming up, that we're cultivating right now, they're not going to be farming in the same ways that we've been farming for many generations. It's going to look different. They're going to change what sustainable agriculture literally looks like, and that's a good thing. And so their version of sustainable agriculture may not look quite like this picture, but in 50 years, we're going to have a really good idea of what sustainable agriculture will look like. Thank you.
Hi. My name's Tiffany Bailey, and I am a farmer. Okay, I am part of that 1.3 or 1.7%, whatever Sarah said, of the U.S. workforce that is actually involved in agriculture. Woo! Thank you. So, like Sarah talked about, we have 1,000 people a day moving to Florida. And so even just in my lifetime, farming has changed so much. It's not just the land that we have to be careful with. We have less land to farm on, but it's also an enormous pressure on the resources that we have and the importance of keeping that sustainable. Today, we farm using less resources and less water per acre than ever before. And that is so, so, so important. So important. You know, I only have 10 minutes up here, and if I had more time, I would love to talk to you about some of the soil moisture sensors that we're using that are significantly reducing the water that we're using out in the field. I would love to share with you some of the precision ag tools that are keeping us super efficient, or talk to you about the microbial products we're putting out in the field that are building up and regenerating our soils, because all that is really, really important. But again, I only have 10 minutes, and so what I want to talk to you today is what I consider to be an often overlooked component of sustainability, and that is building a sustainable business so that the work we do within our sustainability can have maximum impact. Okay, now a lot of the ideas and examples that I will give you today are related directly to food systems and agriculture, but they can really be applied to anybody who work with people. So people, that is the first part of the importance of building a sustainable business. For the first 10 years of my career, I spent a lot of time out in the field, and I would learn how to produce a product, how to work with the soil, how to work with the land, and how to essentially grow something. And then I started to own my business and become a business owner, and I knew that I wanted to grow and scale my business. And everybody knows you can't do that alone, so I needed to build a team. And so as I started building this team, the last few years of my career have really been a lot more about people. Let me go back. Hold on. Don't get too excited about the millennials. Okay, back to the people. We have found that prioritizing employee engagement has been super critical and super important to building a sustainable business. Just like in a lot of your work in agriculture, automation and technology is becoming more and more a part of the workplace. And I think if we're not careful, it's really easy to forget that we're still working with people. And it's super important to give the people that we work with meaning and purpose. People are craving meaning and purpose within their jobs. Okay? So that is especially true with the millennial workforce. The millennials make up the biggest part of the workforce. They're here to stay, and I think it's very important that we understand how to create that meaning and that purpose within these millennials. Now, a lot of times when you bring up millennials in the workforce, you get like this big eye roll, okay? And I think it's funny because I actually am a millennial. I'm on the older side of the spectrum. Thank you. I'm on the older side of the spectrum. I worked a lot in the sun, so I think I have like a lot of wrinkles. So maybe people don't know I'm a millennial because they do that eye roll right in front of my face. Millennials in the workforce, you know? And I think they do that because we all know now that millennials really crave that meaning and that purpose within their work, and that can be kind of hard to do sometimes, right? And so how do you do that? Well, the good news is that it often costs $0, but it takes a certain amount of intention, and it takes a certain amount of energy. And so I promise you, if you take the time to put that energy, intention into communicating with your workforce, it will come right back to you. So part of, I think, a way that you can communicate the purpose and meaning of work is knowing your why. Why are you doing the work that you're doing? We gotta all stop and think about that. Maybe meditated about it like Josh said, but you have to stop and think about it. And stopping and thinking about it isn't enough. You need to be able to put that into words. And if those words include, well, the good paycheck and the benefits are really good, that's not enough anymore. It needs to be more, and you need to, again, be able to put that into words, put it on paper so that you can communicate that all the way from the top of our organizations all the way down to the organizations. Okay, so how else do we engage? How else do we engage our staff? That can look different depending on the work that you do, but I want to give you 2 examples that we do on our farms and in my businesses. The first is a graph of the water usage that we have on a certain farm, and those different colored lines are different years. The top line, the blue line is 2015, and the green line is 2016, and the red line is 2015. So we will actually have meetings with our staff, our whole staff, and we will show them a picture of a graph just like this. And not only are we showing them the improvements that we're making in our water consumption, we're also giving them a target of where we want to be in the next year, the next 5 years, so it can give them something to stand behind, some meaning and some purpose behind the work they're doing out there in the field. And what we're finding is that those employees who have seen something like this out there in the field, they're much more likely to make sure that sprinkler isn't leaking. They're much more likely to make sure that microjet system is working efficiently. Another example is, it's a little blurry, but that is actually a picture of shishito peppers. Shishito peppers are something that we grow on my farm, and those were actually served at the Ritz-Carlton here in Sarasota. So we'll show our employees a picture of these shishito peppers for an example, and we'll show them how the products that we're growing here are staying here. Sarah talked about how important that is, and previously, before the Ritz-Carlton bought my shishito peppers, they were sourcing them from out of the country. So again, it's just taking that minute to show your employees the end product of what you're doing. So another really important component of building sustainable farm and business is engaging with the community. And that can look also different for everybody depending on the business that you're in. I think that farming used to be a lot different 100 years ago or even 60 years ago than it is today. That picture right there at the top, that was taken in 1960, and that farmer, he's bringing his crops, into the community. And so I think a lot of that connection occurred naturally because what that farmer was producing, and frankly, a lot of people in any workforce, what they were doing was directly involved in that community. And now with transportation and logistics, there's a really big gap in between the work that we're doing and the community that it's serving, okay? So again, engaging with the community can look different to everybody. These are two examples of what we do on our farms. The top is a time when we open our farm up to the public for UPIC, and so we invite the public out to our farms. We make sure that we take the effort of having extra staff out there so that they can communicate and talk with the community about what we're doing, the sustainable practices that we're putting into place, and how important that is so that the community can connect with our farm. That second picture is a picture I just took 2 weeks ago. That is a group who works with Gecko's Hospitality Group. They have a small local chain of restaurants here in Sarasota and Manatee County, and we will invite them out to our farm, and we will engage with them and their staff and show them, again, the efforts that we're doing and the sustainable products we're using and what we're doing out in the field and how important it is for the products that we're producing to stay here locally. And so then they'll take that back and they'll engage with the community about those products and about our farm and about our efforts on sustainability. And so I'd like to leave you with a final thought. I think it's really important that we all just stop and think, meditate, whatever it takes. But think about a way that you can better engage with the people that you work with in the community that you're in. Because I think if we can all improve on that, then we can ultimately increase the impact that we're all looking for regarding sustainability. Thank you.
All right. Oh, it looks like we've got a bunch of questions for you guys already. So Sarah's going to join Tiffany back on stage here. And we'll ask some questions. Okay, so when shopping for food, how do we choose produce that is sustainably farmed? Either of you have a...
Yeah, I'll answer that. How do you choose produce that is sustainably farmed? There's no excuse not to know anymore. Everybody has information at their fingertips, and so stop, take the time, research what you're doing, and then I would say once you know, just keep going back to those sources, but make sure you ask that question. Just because it's at a farmer's market doesn't necessarily mean that it was sustainably produced. So knowledge is power. We all have that ability. Take the time to figure out where your food's coming from and make sure that you're getting it from a sustainable source. That's what I would say.
All right, and a question for Sarah. When will IFAS prohibit instead of support the use of glyphosate in Sarasota County Integrated Pest Management Policy?
So that's a great question, and the only answer that I have to it is that University of Florida is not a regulatory organization, so we don't have the power to prohibit anything. Yeah, that's something that really is being done at the state, that gets worked on at the state level with the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So sorry, that's really the complete answer I have for that.
Tiffany, can you share for folks what are the crops that you farm and how many acres do you have out there?
Yeah, so our turf grass is the biggest component of what we do, and that's around 500 acres. And then we have another couple hundred acres of the cattle production. And the organic produce, it's only on about 15 acres it's actually in the middle of its certification process right now. And so that encompasses everything we do.
And where are you located, and do you do tours are also up there?
Yeah, great question. So our farms I have 5 different locations, 3 in Sarasota County and 2 in Manatee County. One of the farms that we open up to the public is in Parrish. And so if you guys want to look up, it's Honeyside Farms. That's what that brand is called. And if you look up Honeyside Farms on Facebook or social networks, you can find out those certain times that we do open up to the public, because it's not all the time. But we absolutely love having the public out to our farm.
All right, and we're going to go back to Sarah and ask, how can we implement sustainable agriculture on a small scale?
Good, thank you. So I think one of the things that's so important about implementing sustainable agriculture is giving a place for people to learn how to do it. I actually also farmed for 16 years before starting this job. And for about 5 of those years, I spent on a training farm where we were actually teaching people to farm sustainably. And without a place for people to go and actually learn the trade of farming, it's really hard to figure out how to farm. And so I know Tiffany intentionally hires young people who want to farm. And it's, and it can be hard to train young people to farm, or people of any age. But that's a really big piece of it, is that we need to have supportive programs and farmers out there who are willing to really mentor a newer generation of folks who are interested in farming. And then just making sure that there is land available for people to farm on. And because actually acquiring land can often be the most expensive part of farming. And more farmers are discovering that leasing farmland is their only option. But many land leases are available only for a one-year lease that can renew every year. But it's really hard to implement some of these really long-term, sustainable, conservation-minded farming practices when you never know from year to year whether or not you'll still be on that same piece of farmland. So I think as a community, figuring out a way to really access some pieces of farmland that will be farmland for a very long time, and being willing to sign longer leases with people so that they have the time and ability to really invest in that piece of land in the way that we would want them to.
And there were a couple of questions about composting. So do you do any composting on the farm? And are there ways for folks who live in homeowners areas that prohibit composting to actually partake and participate in that?
Yeah, we actually do a lot of composting on our farm. We try to let absolutely nothing go to waste, and whether that mean we donate it or we till it back into the land, composting is a huge part of building up your organic soils. I know everyone wants to know the answer to that. How is sod sustainable? You want to know? I'll take the hot question. I don't care. I'll take it. What I can say to that is, like we have said several times, we have 1,000 people a day moving to Florida. 1,000 people a day. Okay, those people are living in houses, and those houses are often built with house pads that are made of lake fill. Those soils are garbage sometimes, I'm sorry. And so sod is a really important part of getting those roots down and plant material down so that you don't have soil erosion. Soil erosion into our waterways is a very negative thing on the environment. And so while you have to be careful with your sod, and please don't be that guy that has to have the brightest green lawn on the street, we don't want that. We really feel like putting down that plant material is really important to our soil erosion when we have all these people moving here to Florida.
Great. We out of time? We're
I
out
think
of
that's
time.
it.
Well, I'll just say to check out Sunshine Community Composting and Tracy Troxler. She's doing a great job here in the county to help people compost. All right.